Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Bradburn and Jim Orr for yet another instalment of the Daily Bulletin. Welcome back to the show, Laura and Jim.
Hello, good to be here.
Yeah, always plenty to discuss because, of course, you haven't been here since Friday last week, and in the world of Celtic, 1 week is a long time, isn't it? There's lots to discuss. Let's get kick-started with the fact that we are in the middle of the January transfer window. So we'll talk a wee bit about that straight away. There was a lot of kind of gossip and rumour around Shane Duffy. It looked as though maybe people were putting two and two together, thinking that Chris Hughton wanted him down to Nottingham Forest. Forest have come out in Sky Sports today and said that they're not interested at this moment in time in Shane Duffy. We know that might not be the case, but it looks as though Shane Duffy may be at Celtic until the end of the season. Even with Shane Duffy in there, surely we need another centre half. What's your thoughts, Laura?
I think definitely purely from a body's point of view, we definitely need that. I would be reluctant to, rush out and get somebody straight away because I think we have a poor track record as far as that's concerned. I don't have any personal information or knowledge of anybody that we've been watching the long term, which concerns me that we might rush out and make a panic buy. But certainly, if we were to lose, assuming even if Duffy stays, if he doesn't go to Forest or wherever else, if we were to lose, say, Ayer to an injury or something like that, you're down to talking about El Hamid, who's not been on great form, Welsh, who's got very little experience, and, Beaton, who's a makeshift centre-back at the best of times. So from a necessity point of view, we definitely need somebody. Who that is at this point, I couldn't really offer an answer without seeing a bit more about what the scouting network is able to do in the current circumstances.
It's one of these things, Laura. Obviously, at Celtic this season, there's been a lot more happening than just the football. And so I had a wee look at some of the transfer targets or some of the transfer targets long term. And it would appear to me that some of the guys that we were apparently interested in are getting tied up elsewhere. Mark McKenzie, Alfie Doughty. And all I'm seeing at the moment is kind of paper talk around a couple of strikers. And I could barely believe my eyes this morning when there was a suggestion that we might even be interested in Stephen Fletcher. I mean, surely we don't need another striker under the current circumstances. I'm looking at the defensive area of the park. But you mentioned Stephen Welsh there, and I'm going to throw this one back out to Jim. He's going to be playing, I would guess, and we'll talk about the game at some point over the next hour. I would guess that Stephen Welsh is going to be playing again tomorrow. I thought he played pretty well against Hibs on Monday night. Under the circumstances, Jim, I think we're kind of resigned to the fact that 10 in a row is gone. Do we stick with the young guy and give him half a season in the team?
Absolutely. You said a second ago, Paul, there, that we've been linked with this player, with that player, that we're interested in this player, that player. Who is interested in those players? Is that Neil Lennon? Is that Peter Law? Who is interested in their players? And does it matter at the end of the day? Because it only matters if those two guys are going to be here at the end of the season. And if that's the case, we're in big, big trouble. So I'm finding it really difficult to get enthusiastic about the football. And I listened to you and Kevin last Monday night before the Hibs game. I think Kevin said, well, you know what, I'm just going to try and enjoy the match, a few young guys playing. And I thought to myself, yeah, I'm going to do that as well then. I'm going to watch the match and try and enjoy it. See, after 5 minutes, it was death by 1,000 cuts. You're thinking, how have we got here? How have we got here? And I think it's really, really difficult to get enthusiastic about the football side of things until we sort the other stuff. The other stuff has to be sorted. Young Welsh, I thought, played really well. I thought the team did okay. But that's where we are just now. Where we are just now is that I actually owe someone apology from Twitter last week, because you asked Laura and I, how do you think we would do over the month of January, and I said, I don't think we'll lose any points. And somebody tweeted that I was very disrespectful, I was shockingly disrespectful to Livingston because they're on a great run, etc., etc. And I responded to that and say, well, given the size of the clubs, given the resources there, you would expect Celtic to win against Livingston. But as you said, a week's a long time in football. I don't expect us to win tomorrow. I think it'll be really tough. We might, if we're lucky, we might get a draw. We might just sneak it 1-0 or 2-1. This is where we are just now. And we have to change. We have to change as soon as possible, because I'm just getting scunnered. That's the word. And last week I said I thought we were in limbo, and this week we're in a much, much worse place in limbo, whatever that's called. Cumbernauld, as the pound shop clock would say. So I don't know. I was a bit scunnered.
Well, when we're looking at some of the situations that we've faced this season, and Livingston now, they're on good form, but at no point in the past would I ever expect Celtic fans to be going into a game like tomorrow against Livingston at home with any kind of trepidation. And it's not a lack of respect. I would expect kind of Celtic to be able to overcome that challenge. They are in great form, but we're going into 13 players down due to the latest coronavirus issues. We've also got the long-term injury, of course, of Jamesy Forrest. So I'm the same as yourself. I'm going into that tomorrow, Jim, and I'm thinking, well, the guys that started the game, I still believe every one of them deserve to start again. I don't think it would be wise to make loads of changes to that side. I know some people were kind of suggesting that Luke O'Connell deserved a shot, as if it's something that gets passed around a Celtic jersey, and I look at that.
But that's where we are. We're talking about those types of players to come in. I think we're going into the game tomorrow. We have nobody up front, and we have a defence that loses goals all the time. So why would you be confident? Where's the evidence to say we should be confident about that? It's just shocking where we are.
Yeah, it is, and invariably, no matter how much you try and focus on the football, invariably, Jim, if I ask you a question, it's depending on who's in charge of the football coaching managerial side of things and who is going to be making executive decisions. So it leads you into that area. And obviously, although there has been an apology made on Wednesday, and Colin spoke yesterday with JP about that, and it's 2 days ago, I've not had your view on it. I've not had Laura's view on that. So it is a subject that we're going to be covering as well, because that, it's the big picture that we're now looking at, Jim. People are looking at odds for a new Celtic manager. I was looking at some of the odds this morning. The names, familiar names actually, that we see time and time again. Martin O'Neill is still being quoted. Jack Ross, Roy Keane, Eddie Howe's in there. Of the four, you look at that, I think Eddie Howe has been a fairly popular name over the last few weeks. We're talking about a new manager. We still have Neil Lennon in place. There was rumours kind of rife on social media last night that Neil Lennon, there might have been an announcement today. I'm pretty sure it was just, rumours and gossip. There
was what I now believe to be a false tweet doing the rounds from purporting to be from Stephen McGowan, a well-known journalist, who's come out and said it wasn't him that said it. Something to the effect that, there's been an about turn by Dermot Desmond and Lennon's out in his ear and Eddie Howe's ready to come in. That, just to anybody out there that might have seen that, my understanding is that has since been debunked by the man himself. That wasn't a genuine story and hasn't been a decision that's been made to anybody's knowledge yet.
Well, that leads us on to that subject, Laura, because we're all guessing, we're clutching at straws. People are taking in by fake parody accounts or even screenshots, etc. Now, yesterday, whether people agree or disagree, I spoke to Sky Sports about the situation. To be honest with you, I can't remember exactly the footage that was used, but that conversation took a lot longer than what you see on the screen. Of course, it's edited down. But one thing I did say was that Celtic fans want more answers because we don't yet know what the results of this review are. And we need to know, an update on that because we're all kind of guessing. A few weeks ago, we said, is that the update? This story that was, running a tabloid newspaper. Then people start going on to JP Taylor's page on Twitter and asking JP. And, he's limited to what he can say as well. So we're all in the kind of dark. And I did raise that. The other thing, again, I would have questioned why Julian was on the trip. These kind of things, I'm not sure if it was used or not. So I'm going to come back to you, Jim. in relation to the situation we find ourselves in. Are we any further forward in terms of getting an answer? What is Celtic's state of play in terms of the management at the moment? Lawrence has even suggested that Neil Lennon will be here beyond this summer. What's your take on that situation as we are?
That wouldn't surprise me. I think if you saw the interview with the chief executive the other day, it was shocking. It was completely a lack of self-awareness. An in-house interview, questions were known ahead of the game. He was known what the answers were going to be. The thing that most people picked up is he talked about our club has been affected more than anyone else. Just kind of, and that's just wound everyone else up. So that's the kind of nonsense that's coming out of that man's mouth. And he talked about looking at the outcome, it was a mistake. So if the outcome was different, you wouldn't get an apology.
No. It
was the outcome, it wasn't what they did. And at no point did they say, you know what, we were idiots here, we were complete and utter fools here. Because he's never going to say that. And I've said that before to yourself, Paul, but you we'd love to have the man on. And I said, he won't come on. And if he does come on, that's the kind of nonsense you'll get. Complete and utter lack of self-awareness. Because, I was one of the Celtic blogs I was looking at yesterday, which I think is really quite a good blog. They've got a lack of self-awareness as well. They come out with something like, it was easy to know on the 14th of January we shouldn't have done this. A 10-year-old kid could have told you back in November we shouldn't have done this. Anyone who works in a working environment would know something called a risk assessment. And if you don't know what risk assessment is if you're going to do something that's a bit different, because usually works and organisations do the same thing all the time, but sometimes they do something different. A new client or buying something from a new supplier or taking kids on a trip or something like that. And do a risk assessment. Very, very basic thing. Let's look at the risks that might happen if things go wrong. And can we handle those risks? And if we can't handle those risks, can we do something to reduce those risks or mitigate those risks? So somebody looked at that and said, you know what, if we have a player having to self-isolate, can we cope with that risk? And somebody said, yes, we can cope with that. What if it's 10 players? Oh yeah, we can cope with that. What about the damage, the reputational damage? Oh yeah, we can cope with that. So somebody's made that decision. One would assume that's the chief executive. And I said last week, and what we were talking about last week was some photographs. We spoke about some photographs, and I said they shouldn't have went, and whoever decided that it should go should be sacked. I said that last Friday, before 13 players were having to isolate. And you know what? I think he's a very lucky man, because I think he's been let off lightly. Because this season has been, as I said earlier, death by 1,000 cuts. Every week, no, bad stuff, bad stuff, bad stuff, bad stuff. And we're all scunnered, and we all think the league is lost. But what about this for an idea? What about this? What if we'd have won at Ibrox? What if we'd have won 2 or 3-0 at Ibrox, played them off the park, and all of a sudden we're all up, we're all enthusiastic, and we go to Dubai, and we come back, and 13 players have to self-isolate, and we drop points to Hibs. If you think you had a hard time then, just think about that. We managed to get things back, and giving it some sort of chance, and then we blow it by going to Dubai. It was the most ridiculous decision.
I think to pick up on what Jim's saying as well is I've seen a lot of criticism of the Peter Lawwell apology for multiple reasons. Like you said, the comment about it affecting other clubs or affecting us more than other clubs is nonsense, because there are clubs who will not survive this pandemic. We will survive this pandemic. So by default, whether you want to talk about case numbers or whatever, we can't claim that it's affected us more than any other club. We also can't use it as an excuse for the poor season, because we've got a team across the city who are sitting 20 odd points ahead of us in the same circumstances. So, but to pick up on what you said, Jim's the first person that I've heard mention something that annoyed me. Like, everybody talked about the first 30 seconds of Lawwell's apology being good. I thought he went off the rails straight from the start with that comment. Looking back on the outcome, we now realise it was a mistake. That is like saying you only think a tackle is bad in a game if you break the player's leg. A bad tackle is a bad tackle regardless of whether you injure the player or not. It's about the risk involved with the tackle that you make. With the trip, it was about the risk involved in us taking them there. Had we not been 22 points behind, had we not had any COVID cases off the back of it, I still wouldn't have agreed with us going on that trip. So to come out and say that the regret or the mistake is apparent because of the outcome it just makes absolutely no sense. Another thing that kind of bugged me was Jerry McCulloch asked a question and framed it in the phraseology of people are almost questioning the values of the club. Nobody was almost questioning the values of the club. We were questioning the values of the club. For him to say that the criticism was unfair and that we didn't compromise the values of the club with going on the trip is utter nonsense. You know, we're sitting in a situation where there's not even enough joined up thinking to think, do you know what? We could have saved those hundreds of thousands of pounds and paid our under-18 players and not had to use the government furlough scheme. You know what I mean? There's a domino effect that results from a situation like this that goes far beyond just whether we are affected on the pitch. There's just the phrase bad optics is used a lot in PR terms and stuff like that. And from at the very minimum, it looks bad. But I think morally it's reprehensible. I mean, we've gone over all this all before, but I think what I found from Lobbo's situation was he was coming out and apologising because he thought it would save him something in the long term. He was not coming out and apologising because he thought, or certainly the content of the apology didn't make me think he's reflected on it and thinks they were wrong.
That's a great point, because you brought up the fact that it was a very costly trip. Some estimate got £250,000, if not more. And although the situation with the under-18s team is that they can't play or train, and they've used a system that's been set up, I take your point, Laura, because looking at the values of the club, one of which is fair play, is that fair play in the greater scheme of things? Would we not be better have saved that money and paid it out of our own pocket? I would say yes. The other one, of course, is respect. So when you're coming away with this has affected Celtic more than anyone else, has it affected Celtic more than Celtic Hearts or Brora Rangers, who were denied promotion, or even the chance rather to be promoted, or Hearts or Partick Thistle? If I'm going to go as fair as I possibly can and say that, you know, has it affected us more than it's affected them? Because that was down to obviously the pandemic and the lockdown first time round, and of course the clubs, as you say, right through the pyramid system, Laura, who won't survive this. So the big thing for me was the reputation of the club was already in tatters, and I don't think that the output on Wednesday has improved that any. Jim, I can see you're like a coiled spring to come in with a point there. What's your thoughts?
No, just to finish this particular part of the conversation, is that I also said last week that anything that happens following that decision we thoroughly deserve. And what actually has happened is there's been so much noise last week. People were talking about the Scottish Government, don't like us, they're against us, this wouldn't have happened to this. All the noise that happened from that to try and excuse what we did, we made a bad decision. And the chief executive should have kept it short and sweet. You know, if you get something wrong, just say, look, we got that wrong, and we'll learn our lessons and we'll move on. Once he kept talking, you just thought, shut up, just shut up, you're making this worse. You're embarrassing yourself. It's like that. What's the guy that does the thing about? He's in the next room. Is that Michael Spicer? Yeah. He's saying, "Shut up! For God's sake, shut up!" And we've got the foundation. Shut up! Shut up! You've said, and it's a world-class facility. Shut up! Just shut up! Mm-hmm. You made a ridiculous mistake, and you should resign. And you haven't resigned. Therefore, we're still in the position that we're in just now. And you've got a manager who's made a complete pig's ear of this year, and the chief executive has played his part, and we've talked about that in the past, about things that he has done, how he has interfered. So losing the 10, hey ho, that's just the way it goes sometimes. But we know who's to blame, and we know the two people that are to blame.
And for anybody who believes that this has just been made a bigger issue by other clubs in Scotland and by the Scottish Government and by Scottish society. If you were on Twitter, I think it was last night, you'll have seen Spartak Moscow arrived in Dubai for their own training camp. I think Colin and JP were talking about it yesterday and made a comment, you know, any advice, Celtic? If the Twitter admin team at Spartak Moscow, who are on the other side of Europe, are making jokes at our expense, you can bet your bottom dollar there are other clubs and other fans all across Europe and all across the world who are looking at the situation and thinking the exact same thing. Now, I don't know what position from which Spartak Moscow think they have an ability to make jokes about it, considering they're doing the exact same thing. You know, we'll see what happens to them in a few weeks' time. But it certainly spread throughout the world. And what I would want to say is, I know that we're coming on here talking about the same subject, the same issue, the same sort of negativity that's around the club. When I joined this podcast in December, I wanted nothing more. I want nothing more than to be able to come on here and talk about Celtic, talk about the football, talk about the team winning on the pitch. If I had been on this podcast during the treble time, that is what we would have been talking about. The top and bottom of the matter is we can't talk about those things because we are experiencing issues that go far beyond that and that are probably bigger than just football matches at the moment. That is why that is the focus of our comments at the moment. That is the focus of our conversation, as much as it might not, you know, it's not enjoyable for me to sit and say this about the club constantly, but that is the fact of the matter, and you can't sit and pretend that it's otherwise.
Yeah, no, I would just echo Laura's sentiments there, because when you asked me to come on 3 months ago, you were saying this will be a laugh, this will be a good laugh, and you're thinking that's not a good laugh, it's depressing.
Sorry, Jim. Fully false promises.
Yeah. Well, it's also the fact that, I mean, we were chatting beforehand about, I think you've come under, I mean, some of the stuff that people have said about yourself, extremely unfair. And I saw the tweet this morning, and somebody said, get behind the club. Now, I love when people say these things, because then you say, what does that mean? What does get behind the club mean? Because you know what, he didn't say get behind the team, he said get behind the club. Now, the club to me is a public limited company. So what did the club think of me, think of Laura, think of yourself? It's money. So am I getting behind the club? Have I bought a season ticket? Tick that box. Do I subscribe to Celtic TV? Tick that box. Have I bought some merchandise? Tick that box. And the thing is, I never get a hamper. Right? I'm not hamper worthy. I am not hamper worthy.
Natasha said she would give you the oatcakes, Jim.
When do we want hampers? When do we want them next Christmas? I never get hamper. I am not hamper worthy. That's what they think of me. Like, I saw today on Twitter.
You'll be getting coal in your sack next Christmas, Jim. You'll be getting coal in your sack.
No, it's okay, because I saw today on Twitter we've now got a Lisbon Line chocolate bar. So I'm going to buy the Lisbon Line chocolate bars as well. So I will get behind my club. So the person who tweeted that, he might even be doing something just now on the comments thing, but tell us what you mean by that. Tell us what you mean by that. Because if there's things to talk about, I mean, do you want me to go out every night and clap, you know, at 7 minutes past 6, 8 minutes past 8, the quadruple treble, what's that, 4 minutes past 3? I'll go out the road and clap. What do you want me to do? Tell me what you want me to do, and we'll do it. Right? Tell us what you want. But don't say things like, get behind the club, because I've got no idea what that means. I've got no idea what that means. Because I'd love to, as Laura said there, be sitting here thinking, if we were 21 points clear, we'd be excitedly looking forward to the game tomorrow against Livingston. Who are we going to play up front? Maybe we should give Lee and Eddie a rest, because they've scored 40 goals between them this season. And isn't he playing well? What about the Europa League last 32 game we're looking forward to? Love to do that. But where we are just now is we're a laughing stock of a club, as Laura just said there. There's people responsible for that, and they're not doing anything about it, and no one's telling us what's happening. And that's why we're in a place that's less than limbo. It's just ridiculous.
Listen, if you believe in alternate timelines, Jim, there is a timeline in which we are sitting discussing that very thing. So yeah. Keep that in mind. It's not the one we're in.
I thought you were going to say keep the faith there, Laura. That's what you said.
Well, to take your point on there, Jim, yes, and I was saying this to Laura before we came on, because a Celtic State of Mind was set up some time ago, 3.5 years ago. We have discussed a lot of the great times over the last 3.5 years. Of course we have. But another point I would make is we haven't been blindly, you know, going along thinking everything was a garden of roses, because when you look at some of the things Kevin Graham has said and was criticised for saying, you know, round about the more successful times during that 3.5 years, you know, what he was saying was right back then, but it's difficult for people to realise, Jim, when things are going well, that you want to raise the recruitment issue, or why did Brendan Rodgers leave, or we shouldn't appoint Neil Lennon. These are all things that Kevin Graham has spoken about, and we have discussed Resolution 12. We have discussed these issues that are very important to a great number of people during successful times. We're now at a point where I'm not going to say we're not going through successful times. This is a moment in time, and what will happen from this point is that Celtic will rebuild. So we're going to be here every single step of that way. But in terms of the criticism, Jim, I expect it. And as I said to Laura before, I don't quote tweets so that people can pile in. What I hope to do is to identify that a lot of the times the people who are giving me flack is that their way of thinking can sometimes be the minority view, and I've had my views changed by speaking to the guests on here, by looking at some of the comments coming through, and that is healthy debate, because people can actually influence the way that you think about a situation. So
and to jump on Jim's point as well, is when people say back the club, what do they mean? For me, being a Celtic supporter is not about praising every single decision that's made regardless of what the decision is. To me, the core of being a Celtic supporter is wanting Celtic to win, wanting the best for the club, wanting the club to progress and get better. If that means saying when they do something wrong so that they maybe change their minds and do something right, then to me that is being a supporter. It is not sitting clapping every decision because you think that is the way in which you should respond. I'm not saying that anybody should or shouldn't do that if that is the way they want to support the club, but don't come out and criticise other people for the way they support the club. As my granddad used to say, you don't have to wear the colours to be a supporter. You can support in any way that you see fit. If you call yourself a Celtic supporter, you are a Celtic supporter, as long as you're not bringing disrepute on the club's name, which I don't think anybody is doing by stating that they don't agree with some of the actions that are being taken.
You're right, and talking about the club being a laughingstock of European football, I said those immortal words and came in for a lot of criticism and thought to myself, was that harsh? And then about a few days later, that tweet comes out from another European football team, which shows that in actual fact at this moment in time we probably are, but we should be setting a standard as Celtic Football Club, because we may not be at this moment in time an elite football club in European football, but we are an elite football club within our own domestic game, and we should be setting the standard, And I think that goes back also to the point you made, Laura, about the trip itself, the cost of that trip. Not even with the other story that broke around the furlough scheme to the under-18s, but just in the fan who spends £500-600 on a ticket, who buys Celtic TV, like Jim says, who buys the merch, who's really struggling at this moment in time, to see such a lavish use of their funds that they've invested in the club. I mean, how many season tickets is 300 grand? So I just think that we've heard all the cliches and reading the room and all. I just think that it was bad judgment. It was a bad call, and I'm convinced that the person who would have had the final say in that would have been Peter Lawwell, for any number of reasons. And yeah, it's great that he came out and apologised, but for me it was too contrived. The words were hollow. It could have been, for me as well, if I really want to dig in on this one, it could have just been the first stage of the charm offensive, with the season ticket renewals coming up. And the next part of that, I would guess, would be a change in manager, but I don't expect that to happen between now and the end of the season, based on views that I've heard on this podcast by the comments section. So I'm now of the way of thinking, Jim, that we do have a new CEO in the wings, waiting in the wings, and they will want to be part of a new structure at the club and the recruitment process and the recruitment of a new manager. Do you think that's something that the club might already be embroiled in, that level of change?
I think the structure is fundamental to everything, and it does my head in when I hear some of the names that we're linked with, again, your Eddie House and your Roy Keanes and all that. It's just lazy. Just lazy. There's thousands of managers, assistant managers and coaches all over Europe. If you're a chief executive, your finger should be on the pulse. You should know who you want to go after. But fundamentally, it's the structure. Do we want another manager or a director of football? What do we want? And I actually thought if you go back to 97, 98, when we Jock Brown and Wim Jansen, it was a shame that they didn't go on. You know, if you manage to get a job around Wim Jansen and they got on at the time, you know, we'd have done quite well those seasons following that season as well. With no Martin O'Neill and no John Barnes and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of like that structure because I think it's very important to know what people do. And they're very strict lines of their roles and responsibilities. And that's why we've failed, because Peter Lawwell tends to kind of go over the lines and gets involved in the football kind of stuff. And for me, I would like a director of football who deals with transfers and negotiations with the players, the youth system, and all that stuff that's not directly involved with the first team. That's the head coach's job. But you want two guys that get on, two guys that have done it before. Go to Holland or Sweden or Germany, wherever. I don't know the answer to this because I'm just a punter. That's all I am. I don't get paid the money they get paid. They should know these people are out there somewhere. So for me, I'm not really fussed about, you know, O'Neill or Jack Ross or Eddie Howe or something. To me, that's lazy. If we end up with that, it's the obvious thing. It's like buying players because you played against them. We bought Barkas because he played quite well against us. We're partly interested in the Swedish guy who played against us for Sparta Prague. He was really good. It's lazy. You know, we should be better than that. So I think the structure has to be right. If you're going to get a new chief executive, one assumes it's going to be a good guy or woman. A good man or woman. If it's a good man or woman, they'll be in a job just now. So how long does it take them to work their notice? That could be 3 months, that could be 6 months. No, he's not going to get a guy tomorrow. That's not going to happen. We'll get the Champions League.
Look at Queen's Park. They've shown probably a lot of ambition getting Leanne Dempster in. She had turned the fortunes of Hibs around in a lot of ways. You only have to look at the replies under her leaving statement on Twitter to see what the Hibs fans thought of her. I'm sure she'll have success at bringing Queen's Park onto another level. Now, if Queen's Park can attract the calibre of somebody like Leanne Dempster, surely we can do something similar. And as far as structure is concerned, I have friends and family members who live over in Holland and who are big Ajax fans. I've been to a couple of games. I've read books about the club. Now, they're a bit like us in terms of they play in a league that doesn't have great sort of standing around Europe. The standard of the teams below them is I went to see them play FC Groningen, and the opposition was non-existent, to be honest. They were on a level of, well, I won't name Scottish teams, but they were on that kind of level. They have developed a system where they have invested in training, they develop players, they bring them out, they sell them on for big profits, and there is no bitterness there about it. They sell them on with a congratulations on your move, all the best for the future, and then they go and develop the next one. And they are happy for that to be the case. And every few years they develop a team like the one they had a couple of years ago that got to the semi-final of the Champions League. If we operated like that as a club, I think we need to get away from this thing of being Celtic players at heart and being loyal to Celtic. That is unfortunately a bygone era. If we could operate more like an Ajax, who we do have a name to trade on, develop those players, get them out into the world, develop the next generation, and every few years you'll bring together a team that will get success because you happen to have a certain group there. And I think that's the way we need to operate going forward, because Ajax are a big club, but I would argue that they're no bigger than Celtic. Certainly not nowadays anyway, and yet they're able to get managers in like Frank de Boer. Obviously has connections to the club, but at the time he was highly thought of, and he did well with them. Peter Bosz, Erik ten Hag, these are guys that honestly, if they were our manager, we would be absolutely delighted with it. So what is it stopping us from having a structure like that we can take the club forward in a manner like that, keep our name, keep our reputation, but maybe just change the focus of what we're doing?
When it comes down...
It's also the fact that if you take what Kevin said last week about we've had all the success in spite of who's in charge, and if you had the people in charge you just said there, just think what we've maybe done in Europe, because again we've been a laughing stock on the pitch in Europe, never mind off the pitch in Europe. So there's all that kind of stuff. To me, that's not lazy. That's like doing what you should be doing. And that's why if you get a chief executive getting paid a lot of money, That's what they should be doing. The first time that we hired Neil Lennon, that was lazy. Really, really lazy. The second time we had them, that was really lazy. And the old saying that if you act in haste, repent in leisure, that's what we've been doing. This season. We've been doing really well up to now, but that's in spite of what's behind. And all the stuff Laura just said there, that's exactly where we should be going. No Eddie Howe's, no Roy Keane's, no Martin O'Neill's, no none of that stuff. And obviously, there's risks inherent in that, in the same way that the Rangers brought in Paul Le Guen, it kind of went pear-shaped pretty quickly. But if you research what you're going to do, and you do it on the basis of that, and it doesn't work out, then you put your hands up and say that we did the right thing at the time, it's just not worked out, because there's no guarantees anything will work out. But when you make silly decisions and they don't work out, you deserve to go, because you stand or fall by decisions that you make.
Yeah, and I'm seeing people coming in the comments saying, that I'm being unreasonable or I'm being unrealistic. That might be the case. We aren't at that level. I'm saying it's something to aim for, something to aspire to. I'm not saying that we'll necessarily reach it, but it would certainly be something to work towards.
In respect to the bigger picture, as it were, the structure of the club, and sorry, Jim, but we can't see your face over this next message from Patrick Murphy, who is commenting on YouTube. For once, I don't want Celtic to bring in more players. The league is over. The majority of support wants the manager out. So why give him any more funds? Priority now should be a new CEO and manager. And that really brings to light. The thing is with that, Jim, is how many of the players were identified or rubber stamped by the manager anyway. And that's a discussion we've had on the podcast quite a few times. So if a player was to come in January, it would have been going through the same kind of system that it had gone through last January and in the summer, which, there's an input from the manager, but they certainly don't have the final say in it, contrary to what Gordon Strachan was saying. So when we're looking at where we are just now in terms of the structure and where that's going to lead us to, Jim used a word lazy. I used that previously when I also called the club arrogant. And what I mean by the club is just the way that we're going about our business at an executive level. Laziness, yes, talking about the 2 times that Neil Lennon was given a job, Jim. For sure there was applications from elsewhere because it is an attractive proposition to be the manager of this football club. People sometimes say that. Why on earth would anyone? You know what? They're not going to focus on what's happened this season. They're going to look at the greater aspect of the standing of the club, the financial element of it, the history, the European pedigree in years gone by, but also the opportunity to take that club back into the Champions League. So there are loads of options available to Celtic every time we come to a point where a new manager is to be appointed. Now, I know some of the names that applied for the manager's job first time round, but this thing, and I've said it to you before, Jim, everybody just took it as read that, Peter Lowell didn't look at those applications and they're sitting in a drawer somewhere at Celtic Park, and Neil Lennon was given that job in the shower. And I just think there was an aloofness to both of those comments. There was an aloofness whereby at that level, because let's not be revisionist here, Peter Lowell is fantastic when it comes to finances at Celtic Football Club. What I'm questioning is all the other parts in terms of the football operation that we've got wrong. And a big part of that is the recruitment, which Peter Lowell has had a big involvement in. So I'm not sitting here saying we're a terribly run club. People keep saying be careful what you wish for. Absolutely. I would love a scenario where Peter Lowell just stuck to that side of things, the accountancy, the finance. That would be great. And then you bring in, like Jim suggested before, someone who is a buffer between the football operation and the executive operation, and that would be a director of football. We don't have that. We certainly don't have that. So I do feel that there was an aloofness to that. There's then been a suggestion that Celtic are going to appoint a Hollywood manager. I don't want that either. That's not what we need. It's not about profile and box office. It's about being part of a structure that's going to work going forward. And that takes in not just the recruitment, it also takes in the succession planning, which means you've got to focus on the youth. Now, we've seen that this season. At what point have we focused on a clutch of 6, 7, 8 youth players and given them enough game time throughout a season when we've got players like Callum McGregor playing over 60 games, Scott Brown at his age playing 50, 60 games? At what stage did we start bleeding these youngsters in so that when we came up against Rangers this season in October and we were without a centre-half, we could have called on Stephen Welsh, who had 20 or 30 games under his belt rather than just the one? That's poor succession planning. So the director of football would have all of that. That would be part of their job remit. And I think in order to do that, we either replace the CEO or the CEO's position is changed. My biggest fear is that won't happen due to the person who's in that position just now, Laura, and that person is Peter Lawwell, and there's an element of control in everything that is done by Peter Lawwell. So do you think it's going to happen, or is he going to be replaced?
I think that I listened to Amy on the podcast the other day, and she said, why would anybody want the Celtic manager's job? Why would anybody want to come to the club? I think the only reason they wouldn't want to come to the club is potentially because they might see a situation where Lawwell has too much input or too much control over what they do. That's the only reason we couldn't attract a top manager. Because as far as the club's concerned, I think we have a reputation that speaks for itself. We have an opportunity for them to get regular European football and to build a legacy with the club. So my preferred option would be, same as most people have said, I would like to see Lennon replaced. I still believe, same as Colin Watt has said, I think Eddie Howe is an appropriate sort of level of manager to go for. Would he come in if Lawwell operated in the same way that he does? I don't think so, but I don't think you're going to get a particularly good manager if that continues to be the case.
A good point coming in from Connell Mallon. Difference with Ajax, which is the example you made, Laura. I thought it was a good example. In Holland, produces brilliant young players. So the Netherlands produces brilliant young players and always has. Scotland doesn't as much. But again, through a Celtic State of Mind, but some of the other podcasts and shows that we do on the State of Mind programme, I've had the pleasure of speaking to a lot of kind of youth football coaches around about Scotland, and to a man, we haven't had any females on yet, although I have asked quite a few on, so hopefully that will happen. To a man, they have said that we are producing the talent. We do have players.
I would totally agree with that, because I was involved in kids football for the best part of 20 years, and we've got loads of good kids, but we've got a shambles of an organisation called the SFA. That's your issue. We've got good kids. Why wouldn't we have as good kids as other countries? Talk to anyone. I was just about to say that. Talk to anyone who's involved in kids football, and they'll tell you the kids are there, and they will give you 1,000,001 stories about organisations like the SFA, and these are the guys that are holding things back, and the structures, and where the kids go to next, and all that kind of stuff. There's your problem. We have to start with schools football, as far as I'm concerned. Because you've got a captive audience in schools. Because football, like a lot of things these days, is quite expensive. And lots of kids, parents can't afford the money to take their kids to football training once a week or buy them kit or whatever. And that's why we have to invest money, in my humble opinion, in schools football. Because I was involved in schools football. They're there. They're a captive audience. Don't charge them money. Let them play football. Invest in there. That's the future. Off a bit of a tangent here. But that's the future, because I can talk all day about this one.
And the other issue is, if your response to any suggestion that somebody makes is just to come up with a reason why you can't do it, so you just don't do it, you're never going to make any progress. You have to say, no, we aren't there. What are the reasons why we aren't there? Can we change those reasons? There's nothing significantly genetically different, to my mind, between a Dutch child and a Scottish child. So why...
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
why can't you make the difference?
That's also what annoys me as well. When people make those kind of comments, well, Holland are better than us. Are they? Show me. Where's the evidence of that? There's no evidence of that. Not unless you're involved in this kind of stuff. As I said, Paul, you could do a whole show, you could do 100 shows on youth football and get those guys in and get them to tell you exactly why the kids aren't doing as well as they should do once you get to a certain level. They'll tell you. And
I think, to pick up on Jim's point about school football, I know we're living in a different age and things like that, but I've read a few books Paul John, you'll know, I've read a lot of books about Celtic history and about the Lisbon Lions and your book on the Quality Street Gang. The competitive edge that was in these players was built through school football. They wanted to play the team that were just down the road or the team that were in the other, that were across the city, or there was a system there. Competitive football was played. You were proud to represent your school and you had something to play for. That could only be a good thing going forward if that was to be reintroduced in a meaningful way. Whether it can be in the current age, I don't know. But certainly looking back, it was a major factor in the success of Scottish teams in the 60s and 70s from what I have read looking back.
Oh, yeah.
There's no reason why it can't be done. No reason at all. It's lazy again. It's people who don't see the bigger picture. And the clubs are just as guilty. They take a lot of the good kids or the better kids away from school football. There's not a lot of school football there. But the kids are really talented, they don't even get to play school football. They're taken away by the clubs. And most of them don't make it. So they're taken away from their pals to go into a different grouping and maybe never do anything further than that. As I said, Paul, you could do a whole 100 shows on kids football and you'd have loads of guys coming forward, loads of men and women coming forward to tell you all the stories that are going on with that. Because basically, and that's also the reason why Scotland haven't done as well. We've only disqualified for the first 22 years. Because kids weren't getting the chance to play football, and then when they did get the chance to play football, the teams are buying foreign players. And that's why Scotland is where we are just now.
No, you're right, and it would take a long time to obviously implement the systems that are required and tear up the ones that aren't working as well, Jim. Just Ajax comparison is a good one. Andrew Parker coming in to say that. I've got to bring this one up from wee Jimmy. Are Stuart Baxter and Gus Hiddink still around? Because there are names that are always come up when it comes to Celtic. I always remember in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, every time we were looking for a striker, the name Ray Stephen would appear in the newspaper. This is an ex-Dundee and Nice striker, and it was always Ray Stephen. He never ever played for Celtic. And it's just, again, going back to what Jim says, it's lazy, you know. But what I do like, and again, I'm going to say it, this is my view being influenced by the input of others within this podcast. It's not as though we come on, Laura, and say, this is my view and it's not going to change. We throw out opinions. We go away, we think about it, we reflect on it. Zinkovix 8754 would love Big King Ralph Rangnick to come in and floor sweep Desmond and Lowell.
I would just like to pick up on Ralph Rangnick. If anybody is interested in learning a little bit more about him or reading up on what he's like, there's an excellent book out there called Dash Reboot by Raphael Honigstein. It's about the revolution in German football that followed the 5-1 defeat to England back in 2000. There's various figures that have a major part to play in that. Joachim Löw, the current national team manager, Jurgen Klinsmann has had a lot to do with it, both importing and exporting coaching styles from the US, where he's mostly based. But Ralph Rangnick has a major part to play in that as well. He was obviously majorly involved in the Red Bull franchise and them getting involved with teams all over Europe. And he would certainly have the kind of forward-thinking sort of ideas that you would want to have at the club to take us forward, because everybody's acknowledging these are big, grand things that we're talking about. These are not things that are going to change things within the next year or 2 years. You're talking about a project, something that's going to be a 5-10 year project to take us from where we are now to the level that we aspire to be at.
Yes,
and I have to maybe look at our expectations in this, because a few months ago, we were talking about maybe getting people like Benitez and Pochettino, and Rangnick to me is in that category. He's a very much in demand man. We will not get Rangnick because he's just too up there for us. We're a kind of small country, small backwater. We are where we are in the football food chain. That's where we are. Rangnick would be an astonishing appointment, it would be an unbelievable appointment, but we won't get Rangnick because other teams will want him. Big teams will want them. Liverpool's and Man U's of this world, Chelsea's of this world. They want guys like that. We won't get Rangnick, but we want somebody who makes sense. As long as it makes sense, off we go. But Rangnick, for me, is way beyond us.
The other thing, the point that's been made by Mark, welcome back to the show. You're talking to us via our YouTube channel. Ajax have an ethos that is legendary. It will take an era of minimal success for us to reach that level. Someone else comes in to say they've won 7 titles in 20 years. That is something that, you know, if you're going to implement a brand new structure, there may be a period whereby you're not dominating the Scottish game. And again, it comes back down to engagement with fans. We need to know what the actual strategy is, you know, so that we can buy into it. And this is a big thing now, talking about a strategy or tearing up the structure or doing something a little bit different. I've been thinking about managerial appointments in the not too distant past. Jim spoke about when we won the league under Wim Jansen. We then appointed Joe Venglos, and at that time Fergus McCann believed that he had to appoint a manager that didn't have that association with the club. And in actual fact, his remit when we were looking for a manager was that they were not to be a British manager. We had an opportunity to bring in Bobby Robson at one stage around about that era, who would have been fantastic, you know, a great football manager. But we had that remit that as set by Fergus McCann, having dealt with Lou Macari and the issues he had with Lou Macari, and then Tommy Burns with Tommy's emotional attachment to Celtic, which Fergus McCann believed could actually detract from the job. So we appoint Wim Jansen and we follow that up with Joseph Venglos. These were, you know, a change in direction for Celtic to do things like that. But what then happened after that was Fergus was gone, and his parting words to Alan MacDonald, the incoming Alan MacDonald, was, do not appoint Kenny Dalglish. So what Alan MacDonald did was he appointed Kenny Dalglish, but he appointed him in this director of football, although that wasn't the title he was given. That was his position as director of football, with John Barnes, the rookie manager, underneath him. And we know how that went. And in actual fact, our performance in the league this season isn't far off the performance in the league at this stage of John Barnes' season. The other thing, the other time I can remember us doing something slightly different, a wee bit more left field, I would suggest, was the appointment of Ronnie Dyler. No association to the club. I'm not going to say he was an unknown, because he was an up-and-coming coach in Norway. Man City were interested in getting him involved in the academy, but we did something different. Do you think there will be an element, Laura, of the Celtic board saying, well, we've tried things before and it didn't work, we should maybe just stick to what we know?
That seems to be the way that they operate anyway, so I don't see that changing without the personnel on the board changing. I personally don't really understand in the modern age this obsession with getting somebody who knows the club or somebody who's a Celtic supporter or a Celtic fan. As much as it will pain a lot of Celtic fans to hear it, we are, to the majority of world football, another football club. And in a way, we have to kind of start trying to operate that way. We have to just look at, you know, you don't appoint somebody to manage in Morrison's because it's their favourite supermarket. You know, it's like, you have to look at their ability and their credentials for doing the job. You have to look at whether they could actually take your club, regardless of who your club is and what their prior connection to you is, and say, can that person make the strides that are required? You only have to look at what's happened with Neil Lennon. Like, yes, he has had much success. Some of it's due to the fact he didn't have great competition in his first spell. Can we honestly say that there's anything in his current managerial record that would have got him the Celtic job had he not previously been a player for the club? My suggestion would be no. And so therefore we have to, if we were in a situation where we could get a top class manager because he had previously played for us, then fine. We basically did that with Brendan Rodgers. We took advantage of his connection to the club and his current situation to get a manager we would never have got. But if it's going to have the opposite effect and mean that we appoint somebody that we otherwise wouldn't have appointed and dilute the quality we have just because they know the club, then obviously that's the wrong way to go.
We're talking about ambition.
This is all about the vision of the club, Paul. This is all about the vision. What's the vision of the club? What's the strategy of the club? Go out there and get the best people you can afford. I don't think we can afford the sort of main guys out there. They're getting silly money. So who's the person that you can afford that fits into the vision and fits into the strategy? Don't overcomplicate things. Keep it dead simple. Here's the vision. Here's the strategy. We've identified 30 people who fit that vision, fit that strategy. 20 of them we can't afford. There's these other 10 here. We can afford these guys. Let's go and get them. It's not that complicated.
No, you're right. And I think one of the biggest criticisms that's come out, and a lot of people are saying with hindsight, but, Celtic fans were talking about this during the period of domination, Jim, is that the vision that we had at Celtic from the executive members at Celtic was, as long as we were dominating Scottish football, as long as we were a nose ahead of the competition, be that Aberdeen for several seasons, Motherwell for a wee bit, and of course Rangers when they come back in. So that's where they've been pitching their ambition and their vision. Now, to go back on a point Laura made about Leanne Dempster, let's have a quick look at Queen's Park, who they are and what their vision is and where they're pitching that. Now, they're obviously being bankrolled and we know that, but you look at the appointments that they've made, even at managerial level. They were interested in Owen Coyle for the Queen's Park job. They got Ray McKinnon. They've just appointed a CEO who, by all accounts, done an excellent job at Hibernian. And you look at their vision. What is their vision? Well, they were an amateur club. They're now a professional club. Their vision isn't it to play in the bottom tier of Scottish football. So they're aiming, and they have a strategy and they have a plan in place. And you sometimes wonder, what was our plan? Was it just to be that, that nose ahead of the opposition domestically? Because it seems that way now when you're looking at that, but people were saying that during these times. Kevin Graham, who often was called the prophet of doom, was saying it when we were winning trebles. But fair play to Kevin for being honest in his assertion there, because in actual fact he's been right. So it's all about having that strategy in place. And I agree with you, Jim. Yeah, let's make sure that push the envelope as far as you possibly can in all departments to make that vision a reality. Can you see the current setup doing that? Do we need changes at CEO level? There's seen a lot of talk about that. A lot of it's coming here. That's the reason we're not appointing a new manager. A new CEO is incoming. If we don't appoint a new manager, we're going to bring in little or no players in this January transfer window. The ones we do bring in will probably be loan deals. Is that why there's this lack of action at the moment from Celtic?
I'd be surprised if we bring anyone in. I think there's enough players there to get us that second place, and except the fact that maybe at the back we're a bit light. But I just don't see us buying anyone. We're not going to buy anyone. We may get the odd loan. We might recall some of the players we've got on loan. That should be enough, without trying to disrespect the other team. That should be enough to get a second place. We get second place, we're in the Champions League. But we have to change the structure. The structure is the most important thing. And if I had to guess what's going to happen, I think we'll keep the chief executive. I think we'll appoint a director of football and a head coach. And I think there'll be very clear lines drawn between the chief executive and the director of football. I think we'll stay. That's my guess.
Well,
if that's Jim's assertion of the change in structure, then I would say, just to back up what I was saying before, although you're saying we have no chance of getting Ranić, what do we lose by sounding him out? What do we lose by saying,
nothing at all.
This is our plan for going forward? At least push it forward. And you never know, even if he himself says it's not an option for me, I'm sure he's got connections in the world to say to a younger, more inexperienced person, listen, this is not an opportunity I'm interested in, but for you it's fantastic. Why don't you give it a go? And we know that his judgment is good enough that he would suggest somebody else to come in. That would be my way of going forward if you're going to go down the director of football head coach route.
This is going back to interesting image choice by Sloppy Giuseppe. I remember that picture. Actually, there was a big pizza as well, which shows you the lack of creativity of the journalist around about that time. Wayne Rooney would have had a chance of lifting the World Cup if he was intelligent. He's a typical product of the football culture here and regarded as world class. On that point, Wayne Rooney's just been appointed Derby manager, so that puts to bed any suggestion by Jason Cundy that he would be a good manager for Celtic. But what I would say about Wayne Rooney is that we have seen it. We've had it, kind of rammed down our throats for a generation. All the greatest league in the world, all that kind of stuff. We've seen Newcastle, we've seen Liverpool, we've seen London producing all these great players who play in supposedly the best league in the world. They're just down the road. So, there isn't some kind of genetic failure that stops Scotland from producing footballers. It's the structure that they are produced into that is failing. And that's a shame, that's a sad indictment when you probably lost a whole or several generations of football players to the structure that we have in place. And quite a few of them who are flourishing now. Kieran Tierney, I mean, Arsenal are now saying it's been a steal at £25 million. Andy Robertson. These are guys who were either freed or almost freed from Celtic. So the structure needs looked at.
John McGinn is another one. There are plenty of examples over the years, even when Scottish football has looked like it's in the doldrums. There's always been a Scottish player never too far from the success. Even going back, Darren Fletcher didn't grow up in the Scottish game, but again, he's a Scottish player who went on to be in one of the most successful sides of Alex Ferguson's reign. And you can say what you like about, whether he was one of their best players. He obviously was good enough in the eyes of Alex Ferguson to do a job. And so he's actually proof that it's about the training setup, it's about the surroundings that make the player. Certainly from a genetic standpoint, there's nothing to stop a Scottish player becoming world class. If there was, then we wouldn't have had all the players that we've had over the years, your Archie Gemmels, Kenny Dalglish, Graham Souness, all those players that were at the top of the European game when they were playing.
The conversation's gone right around to the point where we're looking at obviously the youth structure as part of the bigger structure at Celtic. Tomorrow we face Livingston, the on-form side or in-form side in Scottish football. At home, we're going to be playing a lot of the youngsters who we've seen against Hibs. Tell me, Jim, who were you most impressed by from that crop of youngsters that came in?
Yeah, I thought Welsh played well. I thought the boy Harper was a bit out of his depth. I wouldn't blame him. He must have been thinking he was going to watch the game on Celtic TV a few years earlier, and all of a sudden he's playing the game up against a very experienced Hibs team, and he's playing at centre forward. I understand he's not a centre forward, so I thought he struggled a bit. Opal Flex looked actually not bad when he came on. I'd maybe start with him tomorrow. Dembele, it'd be good to see him have a full game to see what he's like, because getting these wee 10-15 minute cameos aren't too good. I suppose that is the one good thing, is maybe a chance to see some of these other players that we would have a chance to see. But I think it'll be a tight game tomorrow. Yeah.
Good point by JP. Just before I come to you, Laura, Aaron Hickey will be another. I think so. Yeah, he seems to have adapted really well since he went over to Italy. So, Laura, who were you impressed by? We're hoping that we'll see them again tomorrow. Will it be a case of thanks, lads? That's you back out the first team squad after that?
Yeah, well, I don't know where we're sitting in terms of isolation periods, how long. I think the suggestion was, I think it was last Wednesday, is that right, that the isolation period started? So I don't know when those players actually come out of that and when we'll have full use of those players again, because that'll obviously dictate the selection process. My daggers are out for Colin Watt as far as Cameron Harper's concerned, because I was expecting big things. I hadn't seen him, but, like Jim says, it's first appearance and there's a lot of pressure in the circumstances, so you can understand them maybe not getting off to a flying start. I would like us not to throw the baby out with the bathwater as far as Hibs is concerned. We didn't play brilliant, but and certainly I think if we have the opportunity to go back to a more full strength team depending on isolations, then we should do. But I actually don't know what more we can do in terms of selections. Possibly, give somebody like Dembele a shot from the start, because he's just something different. He's just something exciting that teams will not be prepared for, I think. And I remember looking back, I think I said it earlier on in the podcast in a previous appearance, we're now talking about the season before last that he made his first team debut. And he's basically back to square one as far as that's concerned. And I have not, in probably about 10, 15 years since I looked at a player and thought I had genuine excitement when he came on the ball. I would love to see Dembele given a shot tomorrow. Whether it will happen, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the last point I would make, and it's something that we can maybe discuss tomorrow before the game, there was a leaked document talking about players' wages. Interestingly enough, it quoted Ryan Christie's weekly wage at $8,000, which was a figure I gave a few months back. If that figure is true, then there is issues with the payment structure, because that's why a player like Ryan Christie will want to leave. Not just that, we're paying £62,250 a week on 3 guys who are in on loan and not always playing. So yeah, there are big issues right through the structure of Celtic Football Club at the moment, and we'll continue to discuss them. And hopefully when we get some good football and performances on the park, we can discuss them as well. So we'll be back tomorrow. It's been an absolute pleasure reading through the comments and speaking to yourself and Jim. So thank you, Jim Orr and Laura Bradburn, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.